Amplify is back. Don't miss the chance to improve every part of your business by connecting with industry experts, hearing best practices from top dealerships, and learning how to optimize your system for profitability at every turn. You don't want to miss the Amplify experience that is designed to help your dealership improve.
Hey, it's Jamie here in Detroit. On today's bonus episode of Daily Drive, our own Richard Truett talks about Brian Wilson's impact on American car culture after his death this past week at age 82. But first, on Wednesday's episode of the show, I spoke with Telemetry's Sam Abuelsamid about Tesla's robotaxi launch slated for June 22nd. In this portion of our conversation, we go on to talk about recent damage to Tesla's brand as CEO Elon Musk tries to smooth over an epic falling out with President Trump that played out in real time on social media. Elon Musk is really, in his communications with investors and others, he's really de-emphasized the auto business and focused more on the company's future with robotaxis, with AI, with humanoid robots. But it's still, fundamentally a car company. How is Tesla as an EV brand these days?
It's not great. The situation has really made a major turn for the worse over the last 6-9 months, particularly as Musk himself has gotten much more directly involved in politics here in the U.S. as well as in Europe and elsewhere. He's gotten involved in far right-wing politics, promoting far right-wing politicians. And so the part of the population that has been naturally more disposed to buying EVs, who tend to be somewhat more left-leaning politically, look at this and they say, I don't want to support this. I'm not going to spend my money with a company that is controlled by someone who is putting so much of that money back into right-wing politics that I don't agree with. And that's hurting Tesla sales. But it's not the only factor. It's one factor. It's certainly hurt Tesla's brand perception. But in Tesla's biggest market has been in China for quite a few years now. And in China, the competition is incredibly robust. You have a lot of other automakers that are producing EVs that are as good or in many cases better than what Tesla has to offer at far lower price points. The competition is really aggressive, and we're seeing price cuts across the board from companies like BYD, Xiaopeng, NIO, and many others. And they are picking up a lot of market share in China and taking a lot of that away from Tesla. In Europe, Tesla's sales in many countries are down more than 50%, partly because of the politics, partly because of the competition. They're compared to when the Model 3 came out in 2017, there is so much more competition across the board in a wide variety of vehicle segments and price segments that it's really hard for or it's a lot easier for consumers to look at what's out there and say, I'm going to go with something different, instead of buying a Tesla. And even here in the U.S., even though the EV market here is not as robust as it is in Europe and China, it's still growing, and we've got more competition than ever. In a lot of different product categories and a lot of different price points.
Excellent points. It's interesting in the U.S., having alienated a lot of EV intenders on the left and even in the center. Now with this recent feud with President Trump, I guess, he said he regrets some of the things he tweeted. But, it seems like if there was a chance to maybe win over the right, or be at least, the EV brand of the political right, of the MAGA base or Republican Party, that seems like that's gone now. Although, I don't know, with American consumers, they're so selfish. I think, they want the best vehicle for the buck, and they don't really care whether it's union made or non-union made. If it's, a politician they don't like, a lot of folks, would just as soon let Xi Jinping pay for half of their vehicle. If they feel like Chinese cars are subsidized, well, let me take their money.
Yeah, and that's true. But the other challenge that Musk is facing, particularly here in the U.S. With Tesla, is the regulatory front, because the Trump administration is pulling back on emissions and fuel economy standards. And you've got Congress that in the big budget bill wants to pull back on all of the incentives for EV purchases, as well as the manufacturing incentives on that side of the business. And if the emissions and fuel economy standards are in fact rolled back, then what happens is the manufacturers that have been buying credits from Tesla for the last decade will no longer have to buy those credits because they've got products that can meet those lower standards. There's no reason for them to pay billions of dollars to Tesla for those credits every year. And those credits are 100% pure profit for Tesla. So you've got the challenge of their vehicles are going to be harder for consumers to buy because of the loss of the tax credits. They're going to lose a lot of their margin by not being able to sell credits to other manufacturers. And that's really going to hurt Tesla's bottom line. And this is one of the reasons why he's really focusing on other business areas like robotaxis, like robots, AI, and other things, because the narrative behind all of those is those will be much higher margin. Now, the robotaxi business, whether that's actually higher margin or not, remains to be seen. No one else has yet actually figured out a profitable business model around robotaxis. But the humanoid robots, when those actually become useful in a way that people will actually want to buy those, remains to be seen. I mean, I think that's still quite a ways off, and I don't know how many people will actually want to have a robot in their house or even in factories.
Good stuff, Sam. Thanks so much. Sam Abuelsamid, Vice President of Market Research at Telemetry. Thanks again for joining me here on Daily Drive.
Always a pleasure to chat with you, Jamie.
Coming up, we'll take a look at the life and legacy of Beach Boys founding member and lead songwriter Brian Wilson, who helped create the soundtrack of American car culture in the 1960s. That's next on this bonus episode of Daily Drive.
Amplify 2025 is right around the corner. Are you ready? Join the industry's leading innovators this August 18th and 19th at the Ritz-Carlton Dallas Las Colinas and be part of the event that will reshape retail automotive. At this 2-day experience, you'll explore new strategies and fresh ideas for driving real growth at your dealership. Choose from 9 hands-on workshops, each designed to deliver practical insights across every department. Gain forward-thinking perspectives during our expert-led keynote session and leave with actionable takeaways to implement right away. And it's not all business. Amplify also gives you the chance to connect with fellow professionals on the greens at TPC Las Colinas, the iconic course that hosted the PGA Tour's Byron Nelson Championship for 35 years. Secure your spot at Amplify 2025 today by visiting rayrey.com/amplify. That's rey.com/amplify today.
Welcome back. There were car songs before Brian Wilson, of course, but few entertainers in the rock and roll era did more to promote Southern California car culture than the Beach Boys founder, who died June 11th at age 82. Automotive news reporter Richard Truett wrote about it this week on autonews.com. He speaks here with our own Jake Neer.
Richard Truett, welcome back to Daily Drive.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
It pains me a little bit as a music guy myself that we can't use the actual music that we're going to be talking about here from Brian Wilson. I am a huge Brian Wilson fan myself ever since I was a kid. You are the resident car guy here, and so we're going to talk a little bit about Brian Wilson's influence on car culture. Talk a little bit about his legacy as far as that goes.
Southern California in the early 60s was the place to be if you love music, and especially if you love cars, because California was the first place really that imported cars caught on. British sports cars, Japanese cars, Porsches, California was the place for that stuff. In doing some research, we've learned that Brian Wilson wasn't a gearhead in that he would go out and, build an engine or anything like that. But if you take a look at the lyrics that he put in songs like Little Deuce Coupe and Shutdown, it's incredible the amount of stuff that he sang about that made it into the top 10. We're talking a flathead, a reference to a flathead engine, and lake pipes, which is a kind of side pipe that's on a car. Dual quads, that's 2 4-barrel carburetors. Competition clutch, talks about burning the pressure plate, and just all sorts of just really cool stuff that he got into songs that gave him a lot of street cred with the people who raced those cars and drove them down to the beach.
It's so funny because as someone who's seen the biopics and all that, there's multiple, it's pretty clear as soon as you start learning about Brian Wilson, not only was he not really a gearhead himself, but he also, they pioneered surf music. He was not a surfer whatsoever, but man, he really was able to not just, put it down in the lyrics in a way that seemed authentic, but also the music was just so perfect. It created a whole soundtrack to a culture.
It did. If you take a look at creative types, writers, songwriters, what they're able to do is connect the dots on different things. Brian Wilson was a very observant guy. He might not have been a great surfer, but when he went to the beach, what did he see? He saw really cool cars down there, right? I'm sure he was exposed to some California street racing, which was, all the rage back then. And he was able to connect those dots and sort of create his own niche, his own genre for music.
Now, you mentioned that California is an especially interesting place to be writing about car culture at this time. Obviously, he was writing about Honda, things that, if you were listening to Motown, you wouldn't be hearing about Honda.
No.
Talk about that.
It's 1964. I don't think Honda had built its first car yet, or maybe they had just started, but they were having a little bit of success with this little 50cc scooter, and they were all over the place in California. And so he wrote a song that was basically just an album track on a long player called All Summer Long. And out of nowhere, this pop-up group, I guess you could say, sort of heard that song and decided that they were going to cut it as a single. And the group was called the Hondells. And let me tell you, the people at Honda, not only do they know about it, but that's a big part of their history. I reached out to Honda yesterday and I said, hey, you guys know, obviously, Brian Wilson passed. What does he mean to you? And let me read you the statement that Honda sent me. Honda's place in America's culture, they wrote, was immortalized in the song Little Honda, written by Brian Wilson. It became a top 10 single on the pop charts when released by the Hondells in 1964, perhaps the only time a pop music group took its name from a company. All of Honda mourns the loss of Brian Wilson along with the rest of America and the world, and we offer our condolences to the Wilson family. Can you imagine, though, in 1964, you're Honda, you probably have 10 or 15 people in the USA. Nobody knows who you are really outside of California. And all of a sudden, millions of people are singing Little Honda all over the country. It's like you can't buy that kind of publicity. That's the influence that Brian Wilson had.
You also got a statement from Chevy, is that correct?
Put out an Instagram post with a Corvette and 2 surfboards on it, and it said, "God only knows where we would be today without you." And Brian Wilson's years of 1942 to 2025. Wow. Very, very classy.
Citing my favorite song that Brian Wilson ever wrote, and probably what I would argue is the greatest pop song of all time, God Only Knows.
Yeah, it's a great song.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to say about Brian Wilson?
Here's the one thing. No matter what era you grow up in, I'm from Florida, and of course, this was way before my time. But I can tell you that many times I drove to the beach in my Triumph TR6 with the top down with the Beach Boys blasting, because nothing sounds better on the beach in a cool car than Beach Boys music. It still resonates to this day.
Richard Truett, thank you so much for your work. You can find Richard's piece on autonews.com. And Richard, thanks again for joining us on Daily Drive.
Jake, can we put together a Spotify list of Beach Boys songs to sort of let our listeners know?
I think so, yeah. You could check in the show notes and on our article page as well. And we'll definitely, we'll have a Spotify playlist with all the songs on there for you that we couldn't play here on the podcast because of licensing issues. But good idea, Richard. Let's do it.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to this week's bonus episode of Daily Drive. We'll be back on Monday with a brand new full episode of the show.